Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's GP Strategies webinar. My name is Kayla Rotz, Marketing Manager for GP Strategies, and I am happy to be your host for today's event. If you've joined us before, we are very glad to have you back, and if this is your first webinar with us, well, a big welcome goes out to you. We have a great discussion planned today. Vivian Reinica has joined us to help prepare you for the 2021 compensation cycle with SAP SuccessFactors. Vivian is a compensation, learning management, and employee central professionally certified consultant at GP Strategies. She started her career in 1994 working on SAP HCM on-premise, making the switch in 2014 to focus on SuccessFactors talent modules. During her extensive career with SAP and SuccessFactors, she has been involved with many compensation implementations, including those that integrate with Employee Central, supporting customers with their annual compensation cycles. So without further ado, Vivian, welcome. We are so happy to have you here, and we'll go ahead and turn the session over to you.
Thank you, Kayla, and good morning to everybody, and thank you all for joining. Before I get started, I just want to state that the objective of this presentation is not to include every single aspect of a compensation implementation, but rather to give you some pointers to make it a little bit easier for you to do so. So we are going to look at new implementations of SuccessFactors Compensation. We are going to look at customers that's already on SuccessFactors Compensation. We're going to look and see what a compensation health check is, and then also lessons learned, and we will have a question and a discussion session at the end. Okay. So what I want to do with the new customers is kind of look at your understanding. So what you need to do is understand the functionality available to you within SuccessFactors. You need to look at existing configuration of other modules within within SuccessFactors, for example, Employee Central, if you have performance and goals already set up, what of those modules will affect compensation and vice versa. You also want to look at any gaps between the processes you currently have and the functionality available in SuccessFactors. And lastly, we're just going to quickly look at some system limitations. You need to be aware and understand what the system limitations are. So the first item that we have is you need to understand the functionality available to you within SuccessFactors. So the first item I'm going to look at is workflows. So there's different hierarchies available to you within SuccessFactors. So it's important for you to understand what those hierarchies are. Make sure that you do not have too many levels within your workflows. What I mean by that is, so you would have the first level manager would submit his recommendations. There will be a second level manager that will review the recommendations, either make changes or approve it, and then it'll go into a holding pattern, and there's something called like executive review that we can potentially use to do the next levels instead of setting everything in the workflow. So it's more flexible to you, and you can actually have as many levels as you want and control that maybe by giving people permission to edit or permission to only view, or neither. So you also have the ability to set different workflows for different processes. So if the process for your bonus or API is different than the approval process for your merit, for example, then you can set those different hierarchy or workflow levels based on every one of your plans. Unless you are using the all-inclusive compensation template, it's called the total compensation template. If you use that, you pretty much have to pick which workflow you want to use. because everything will be the same workflow. What is nice about that is all managers will be able to go into one template, one worksheet that will be sent to them, and there'll be different tabs. So that's always probably where you want to end up if possible. But if not, and you have separate templates, that's fine too. The next item you need to start asking question about is your budgets. So you can define budgets by component or by group of components. And what I mean by that is, so if I say component, I mean merit or lump sum, promotions, adjustments, bonus, whatever your different equity plans are. So you can set up a budget separately for each one of those, or you can combine them. So you can say my merit bonus needs to include merit, lump sum, as well as adjustment. So you can either group them or keep them separate, or most important, you do not have to have a budget at all if you choose not to do so. Another decision that you would have to make is you would need to make a decision on how you want to display the budgets in the budget box. So say, for example, I have a merit budget, but I am implemented in 10 different countries. You have the option of displaying it by country. So my merit budget will be broken up by, in the US, this is my budget. In the Netherlands, this is my budget. In South Africa, this is my budget. So you can decide what the grouping is that you would like to see the budgets in the budget box. And this is also nice if you have managers that actually have employees in different countries. They can see per country how that is broken up. Okay, so we next would look at guidelines. So first thing is, do you need to set up guidelines? You do not have to have guidelines, but it is nice to kind of keep people within limits. So there's a minimum and a maximum and potentially a default. So what happens if you enter something in the default? What it will do for you is when the manager goes into his worksheet and he starts planning, it'll actually show that default for him. So if I have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 6 and the default is 4, what the manager will see is the 4% in the merit box when he starts doing his recommendations. Now, a lot of companies choose not to put a default in there because they want to make sure that the manager actually goes in and plans as opposed to just accepting what the default is. So you do have those options. What you also need to ask is, do I want to force managers to stay within those guidelines? So we call it hard or soft limits on guidelines. So you can choose which option you want to do. And also another thing you need to think of is, what are the factors that feeds into your guidelines? What I mean by that is, do I set up guidelines by country? So if I work in India, my guideline will be 10 to 16%, whereas if I work in the US, my guideline will be 3 to 5%, for example. So you can set it up. There's parameters that you can use and define. You can also do it by rating. Say, for example, you have a rating scale of 1 through 5. You can set up the guidelines and say, if a person has a guideline of 1 or 2, they do not get anything. So the guidelines will just be 0 for those people. If I have a guideline, if I have a 5, obviously it's going to be more the 4 to 5% as opposed to even the 2 to 3%. So you can decide what the parameters are that you would like to use. Okay. We next look at notifications. For compensation, you have the ability to modify notification based on template. So if I have the merit template, wording on the notifications could be different than the wording on the bonus plan or on the equity plan. But and secondly is, you can suppress notifications. You do not have to print any notifications if you choose to do so. So what you would need to do is check with your consultant when you start your implementation and find out for any one of these what your options are, what is available. Let them show you in the system or maybe do a little demo for you to explain the differences to you before you make your final decision. Another important point, and that people tend to forget about because that's not important right in the beginning, but it becomes the most important thing at the end, is the compensation statements. Do I want to print a statement by template? So if I have merit, equity, and bonus, separate templates for those, do I want to print a statement for each one of those? Or do I want one combined statement at the end that'll basically summarize my bonus, my merit, my lump sum, promotions, whatever it is, into one statement and make that available for the employees to look at on the employee central side, or however you want to communicate. Okay. People tend to forget that some of the fields that you want to use on statements. Make sure that you communicate that early to your consultant or implementation partner to make sure that whatever fields you want to use on the statement, especially if there's calculations involved, that is included in your worksheets or in your templates. And an example of that would be if you look at your template, the manager has the ability, say for example for merit, to enter either an amount or a percentage that they want to give this employee. Well, they both show up on your screen, but it's only one field in SuccessFactors in compensation. So the only one that's available to you when you print the template is actually the amount. So if your consultant, what they would need to do if you want the percentage to display on your statement is make sure that you put in a field in the template, and it is hidden, so a manager would never see it. It's hidden and only used for the statements. So what you will do is you'll do the calculation, and they're saying take my annual salary divided by, or take the increase amount divided by the annual salary, and that gives me my percentage that's going to be displayed on the statement. Now, that being said, it's not impossible to do these calculations after the fact, but the problem is it becomes a little bit more complicated because you have to do it in XML coding, and it also could cost you more money if you do not define these fields up front. And also, what other options do I have available? Can I suppress boxes on the statement? So in other words, if a person doesn't have a bonus, can I suppress that box completely? Or do you want to suppress that box completely? Do you want to add footnotes? So if a person gets equity award, then there'll be a footnote that is displayed. If they don't, then you do not see the footnote. Things like that, just kind of mark up your statement as well as you can up front so that 90% or 95% of what you are going to need on the statement is already included. And then dealing with the 10% after the fact, that will not take that much time and will most likely could be included, but make sure you mention that up front. Okay. The last thing that I have on this slide is promotions. So you have the ability to do promotions as part of your compensation cycle. So what this does is if a manager wants to promote an employee, there's a pop-up that's going to show up that will allow the manager to actually select the new position or anything else that you define that he needs to be able to change, and what they can do it as part of that. So it wouldn't be on, say for example, if you use Employee Central, it wouldn't be on the Employee Central side until you write everything back, that the changes that the manager, until you write it back to the Employee Central side. So you have that option. So you just need to make a decision on whether you would like to use the promotion process in compensation or if you want to keep it outside of compensation. Okay. All right. I will move to the next slide. So the second thing that you would need to think of is what modules exist in SuccessFactors today. So if you already have Employee Central implementation, then you have certain questions that you would need to ask. The first one being is, do I want to integrate my compensation template with Employee Central? If the answer is yes, what I need to find out is all of the fields that I need to support compensation, is that already configured on the Employee Central side? The second thing is, what type of rules do I want to use? Do I want to use business rules that's more flexible because it has the ability to use any of the data that's already in Employee Central versus legacy rules that is on the compensation side that pretty much limits you to a lot less than what it does if you use business rules and using all of the data available on the Employee Central side, or most of the data. The next thing is, typically you would set up your pay matrix, your salary structures, minimum, midpoint, maximum salaries on Employee Central. Is that already correct, and is that available? Does that support the compensation process? If not, you do have the ability to set up salary structures on the compensation side, but that is not recommended. I'm just mentioning it because that is an option. And I've seen customers use it, but typically they end up going back to Employee Central. So make sure that whatever is set on the Employee Central side, that supports your compensation process. That is the best solution or the ideal solution. So the next thing I need to ask is, how do I handle changes within the compensation cycle? So some companies choose to freeze everything. So they say that no promotions, no merits, no anything on the employee side until the compensation process is completed. And the reason for that is, if my base salary is X and I bring that into my worksheets, and now somebody changes the salary, then my merit or my bonus or whatever the calculation is, the calculation base for that is going to be off. Okay, so so I can do promotions in there. I can manually move people. So I can move, if people move around, I can move a person from one worksheet to another worksheet by simply going into the maintain a single worksheet and move people around. I can delete people off of worksheets if they terminate it, because that's not really something you can always control and say there's a freeze, nobody can be terminated. So if somebody terminates and I want to remove them, I can manually go in and move them. What's also available to you are update programs. So you can run the update program for a single worksheet. So if I just want to update one worksheet, I can run that single worksheet. I can also run an update for all worksheets. So in other words, if I want to capture any movement that happened in the company, so person moving from one manager to another, a person terminating, a person no longer eligible potentially, you have the option of checking eligibility as well. In addition to running these update processes manually, you can also schedule a job to run periodically to update all worksheets. So what will happen is, I can say at 10 o'clock every night, for the duration of the compensation cycle, or at least until the first level manager has done all of their recommendations, I want to run this process. And you can schedule that so nobody has to manually do that. It just automatically happens. Or you can choose just to do nothing. So keep everything static as the day that you launch the worksheets. It'll stay the same until you actually complete and pay the people. So that is an option for you as well. And what typically would happen is, if a person moves to a new manager, the two managers can talk offline and determine what they want to do with this employee. And I've seen it done all different ways, so there's not really a wrong or a right way. It just depends on what your needs are. The next thing you need to look at is performance ratings. So am I going to be using performance ratings to, for example, influence guidelines? If so, where is the performance ratings coming from? Is it going to be coming from the performance and goals side? Am I going to allow a manager to enter it on the worksheet itself? If I bring it in from performance forms, which rating do I bring in? Do I bring in a calculated rating? Do I bring in a static rating? Do I bring in an overall rating? Or can I only use ratings when forms are completed, or can it still be in process? So those are all the types of questions that you would need to ask for you to be able to decide what the best option is for you. Okay. Right. Okay. So are there any gaps that needs to be identified in the requirement sessions? I think one of the important things here to note is the one way for you to find out what gaps are is to know what you have in the system. So if Employee Central, for example, is implemented, you need to make sure that you include somebody that understands what is set up and exactly how it works on the Employee Central side. That is how you're going to know. Say, for example, I have an adjustment and there's no pay component in Employee Central to support that, then that needs to be created. So the best person to be able to tell you about that is somebody that is working on the configuration and understanding the Employee Central process. So that would be one of the people that you would need in your requirement sessions. The next thing is if you, for example, have different payroll systems that you would interface with, you would need somebody that would understand the integration between them, because you would need to know what you need to send from the compensation side to support the processes on the payroll side. So if you have SAP on-premise, for example, you would need somebody that understands the replication process. If you have integration with ADP payroll for some companies, you would need somebody that understands integration with ADP to know exactly what they would need from you from a compensation side to support those processes and make sure that whatever the payments are, whether it's a bonus or a salary increase, whatever those components are, that it feeds correctly into the payroll systems. So whether this is a new implementation or a change to an existing implementation, the one thing that people tend to forget is change management. So you want to actually communicate, and like I've heard said, is early and often. Make sure that everybody is kept in the loop, no changes are coming, and they don't need to know right up front exactly what those changes are. But it's important for them to know that changes are coming and that they need to be prepared for it. Because if surprises are never good, right? Especially if you, the day before a compensation worksheet kicks off and gets published and sent out to the managers, if they get a note that says, oh, by the way, we have a new process in place and this is the process you need to follow, and just send them an email, it's not going to be a good ending to that story. And I'm sure you're going to end up with a lot of manual work because people were not aware of what is going to happen, were not trained properly, and change management and change agents are really important. So make sure that you include them up front so that they can start that communication process early. And lastly is make sure that you have people that understand your compensation processes. And for every one of these that I've mentioned, it could be multiple people. It doesn't have to only be one person. For example, you have somebody that understands your equity process but never works on bonus, or bonus but never works on merit. So make sure that you have the correct people in the room that can support these conversations and that can really help identify what the gaps are between your existing processes and what is needed in SuccessFactors or available in SuccessFactors. And remember that not everybody has to be in every single meeting. So if I do the bonus process, then you would need the correct people to support the bonus process. Employee Central might be needed for all of them, and change management's most likely. But at least have the correct. Make sure you have the correct people in the room for every single meeting. Right. So last but not the least is system limitations. So we saw on the previous slide that I said you have to have the correct people in the room. So not only does that help to identify gaps, but it also helps to identify system limitations. So say, for example, you have a unique way of calculating your proration, and it's not able to replicate that with the standard proration rules that is available on the compensation side. What you will do is you will sit down and decide, do I adapt my processes to align with the way that SuccessFactors work, or do I create new columns or custom columns and make the formulas work the way I have it working today? So those are all questions that you would need to ask, and your compensation consultant or implementation partner will definitely be able to guide and help you and maybe give you some options that's available to you to help you make the best decision possible. Okay, so I know this was really a quick overview of some of the things that you can ask as a new compensation implementation, for a new compensation implementation. And this is just, like I said, this is to guide you and help you ask the right questions. I know that it is not going to be answering every single question or covered every single aspect of your implementation, but definitely will give you a good start if you ask the right questions. Okay. All right. We are now moving ahead, and we are going to look if you are already a customer and already has compensation implemented. So I'm not going to go in as much detail with this as I did with the new implementation, but just want to cover a few items or a few questions that you would need to ask. So has there been any changes to your processes since the last compensation cycle? For example, so merits are no longer based on a fixed amount. It's now based on a percentage per country. So originally, when you implemented compensation, you said, okay, my merit budget is 3% or 5%, whatever it is for that year, for everyone, no matter what. So now you've decided that, you know what, if I work in country A, the cost of living is much higher, and I definitely need a bigger increase percentage than what I would in country B, for example. So I would say, okay, 16% for country A, 3% for country B. So now the way that I do my budgeting would be different. So that is something, for example, that would be considered a change. Or one other thing would be, say, for example, I give somebody a merit and they are over 100% comp ratio, for example. Can I actually take the access amount and spill it into the lump sum? So if that is something that I want to change, that is another example of something that could potentially change on your process side, and then you would need to adjust that on the SuccessFactors side as well. The second thing is if you implemented performance management forms, for example, so new functionality that you can use. So you've implemented performance forms after your previous compensation cycle. So now you want to use the performance ratings as opposed to using ratings on that a manager enters, for example. So you can actually now remove your custom column that you created for that, and maybe you uploaded that previously just to get everything in there. Now you can just use standard functionality. So you can get rid of a custom column, and you can use the standard process to import your rating from the performance forms, just for example. The third thing is the new functionality that can streamline your current processes. So, and I'm going to say recently, but using that term loosely. So a while back, SAP came up with the total compensation template. And I know I mentioned it earlier in this process. So instead of managers having to go to 3 different worksheets, one for merit, one for equity, one for bonus, I have the ability now to combine them all into one total compensation template. Now, there are certain rules, of course, that you have to keep in mind, or certain limitations that you have to keep in mind. So your processes may have to change a little bit, as opposed, for example, who the planners are, right? So some of those things may have to change a little bit, but it is possible for you now to have one template that you roll out, and managers, instead of having to go into 3 different worksheets, they have the tabs at the top, and they can just switch from merit to equity to bonus on the same screen just by clicking the different tabs. This will definitely streamline your process, and managers have the ability then to see what they did for one person, everything in one, on the 3 different tabs on the same screen. So that would be something that you can use new functionality to streamline your current process. The last thing is, is there maybe new functionality that you want to implement? Say, for example, you've used the merit process for a while, and now you want to give managers the ability to do spot awards. So you want to implement the rewards and recognitions in SuccessFactors. So you have the ability to now come in and say, okay, I want to actually roll out new functionality to managers. And then you can start looking at that, have your implementation partner again just go through and assist you with implementing the new functionality. Okay, so to help you to answer some of these questions, what we have available on the at GP Strategies is something called a health check. And what this does, and right now on this one, I am actually only focusing on the compensation piece of it, but GP Strategies also have the ability to do a complete SuccessFactors health check. So even though this presentation only focuses on compensation, we can also look at your Employee Central setup, how that feeds into compensation, performance management, any of the modules that you roll out on the SuccessFactors side. We can come in and review and make sure that everything looks good, kind of like a medical checkup, but this is just a system health check. So just want to mention that. So as part of the review, we will look at your existing templates. If you have any custom fields or columns, we can review your budgets, your workflows, guidelines, also any lookup tables. Maybe data became available in Employee Central that has been defined in lookup tables previously, so you can eliminate the need for a lookup table and just use Employee Central for that purpose, which would definitely streamline your process because the data will be maintained throughout the year as opposed to scrambling before your compensation process to get the lookup tables updated. So we can propose maybe it's just one field that gets maintained on a person, and we can recommend that instead of using a lookup table, you can just use a field in Employee Central. So we can look at everything and make good recommendations on what the best options are for you. Okay. As part of the health check, what we will do is we can do a high-level review of your existing configuration. Then what we will do is we will determine who is best suited to address your concerns and evaluate your compensation processes that you have today. So we will take a deep dive into your processes. So we will talk to team members in the form of either interviews that we schedule or workshops. And we can address any of your current pain points, like understand what the issues are you have with the system today, and then around that, as well as looking at your configuration, we can then determine what the best way is for you to move ahead. We can document all our findings and recommendations, and we can document next steps. And what this will do, the next steps, so we can say for example, and I'm just referring to a customer, something that I just did recently is they, for example, had too many steps in their workflow. So what the health check did for them is it basically said, you know what, you have too many levels, this is too confusing. Why don't you make the number of workflow steps less and then use executive review? So those are just some of the recommendations. And you have to keep in mind that these are recommendations, and we will provide options and explain and go through every one of these. But ultimately, you have to decide which of those recommendations you are actually want to implement. The key here is to make sure that you do this well in advance of actually rolling out your next cycle, because what you don't want to happen is be short on time and not being able to get everything done and also roll out your process for the next year. So the good time to do it is either a couple of months before you plan on doing your implementation, if you want this to be part of your new cycle, or if you want to do it after your cycle so that we can review and then get ready for the next year and make sure that you have done the evaluation and the health check way in advance of doing that. Now, if this is something that you are interested in, we can definitely go into more detail. So at the end of this presentation, you will see my contact information, so you can contact me or either one of the moderators for this call, and we will put you in contact with the correct person, that can talk to you more about this. Okay. All right. So last but definitely not the least is what is important is lessons learned. Make sure that you allow enough time to implement or make changes. People tend to underestimate because they think, oh, all we have to do is copy the plans from last year and just do this, this, and the other. But there's a lot, yes, you can do that, but I always recommend testing, 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 even if you only make a few changes. Data might have changed that you are not aware of that feeds into your process. So keep everything in mind and rather be done early than not be done on time and try and scramble at the end to do the last minute changes. Again, something I want to iterate is do not forget about compensation statements. That is so important, and make sure that you include all of the fields and kind of have a mock-up, especially what fields you want to use. The wording you may not have to be done early enough, but make sure that you know exactly what the fields are that you want to display. So like I mentioned before, the merit percentage, that even though it's on your template, it is not necessarily a field that you can use on the compensation statement. Communication. Communicate early and often. The more people know up front, the less scared they are going to be of the change. You're always afraid of changes, so make sure that there's nothing to be afraid of, that they know exactly what is going on every step of the way. So make sure to include your change management team early. And they also the people that most often are responsible for the training, so that they understand exactly what it was before and what it is now, or even if it's a new implementation, make sure that they know exactly what is going on. They don't have to understand the workings, but they do have to understand the changes or the impact to the different groups in the company. Never be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. And you know what? I always, if I think, oh gosh, I wonder, am I going to ask this question? Is this a stupid question? 99% of the time, there's somebody else in the audience that is thinking exactly the way you are thinking and that has exactly that stupid question. So do not be afraid to ask. And more important, test, test, test. Make sure every change you make, test your entire process. You think it's a little change, but you don't know what else it's going to affect. Where else is that field used in formulas that I'm not thinking of right now? So make sure you test every single aspect of every single one of your worksheets. Make sure you calculate every field and make sure that it is working correctly. prior to moving to production. So can't iterate that enough. Test, test, test. Okay. All right. I think that is it for my presentation. So Kayla, I will hand it
Yes.
back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian, for this very important discussion. We have a little bit of time left, so if you have a question for Vivian, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module at this time. Obviously, she's covered a lot over the last 40 minutes or so, and there's still a lot more that we could discuss. So I do encourage you to continue the conversation with her beyond today's session. Vivian, if you can go ahead and flip it to that last slide, I want to make sure everybody has access to your contact info. Yeah, I believe your email. Yep, your email is right there. And so I do encourage you to keep in touch with her. I'd also like to remind you that the recording and slides from today will be emailed to the email address that you provided when you registered. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into this a question that came in. So Vivian, the person asked, do I have to turn on the integration between Employee Central and compensation if I already have Employee Central implemented?
You actually do not have to do that. So there is an option to import data if you choose to do so. So even with Employee Central turned on, you can still import data into your compensation process. Now, I don't see many customers doing it, and I would most likely recommend not doing that, but it is a possibility. You can use import fields to import the data, as well as eligibility. You can control eligibility by using an import file as well. But yep. Thank you, Kayla.
Yes, wonderful. That was the only question that came in. I'm going to go ahead and leave this open. Folks, if you have any questions, be sure to enter either into the chat or the Q&A module at this time. If we don't end up having any more questions here in the next few seconds, then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and wrap up the recording. And so it doesn't look like we have any other questions that are coming in. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. I do want to say thank you again to today's speaker, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for future webinars. Information on those webinars and registration is available on our webinar page at gpstrategies.com. I wish everyone a wonderful day, and Vivian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resources-library.